He always believed making money was the goal of business. Today, he learned that kindness could make him richer than any deal. David sat in his truck engine, humming quietly. Outside, a man argued with a customer, Tom Harris. His name tag was peeling. Sweat rolled down his temples. Behind him stood an old delivery truck, rust spreading like disease. Black smoke rose from the hood. "You call this junk a truck?" the customer shouted. "Don't come here again if you can't afford a real vehicle." Tom lowered his head. His shoulders trembled, but his hands stayed strong, gripping the box he was delivering. David felt a knot tighten in his chest. He used to think strategy and profit were everything. Watching Tom, something shifted deep inside him. He didn't know it yet, but this man's story would change his life forever. The next morning, David pulled on an old work jacket. Its sleeves scratched his skin. He slipped a safety vest over it and adjusted a battered yellow hard hat on his head. He looked in the mirror. The CEO was gone. In his place stood an aging laborer with tired eyes and rough hands. He stepped out into the lot. Dust blew across his boots. Forklifts beeped in the distance. Workers moved crates onto pallets. No one recognized him. To them, he was just another hired hand. David felt a strange calm in this disguise. For the first time in years, no one bowed. No one forced a smile. He was invisible. He walked towards the trucks. His eyes searched for Tom's old rig. It stood alone under the morning sun, rust glittering like scars. He clenched his fists. Today he would see his business through the eyes of the forgotten. David's boots crunched against gravel as he walked. Suddenly memories pulled him back. Years ago he pushed a rusty wheelbarrow through a crowded market. His shirt clung to his back with sweat. His hands were blistered and raw. Fish guts and rotten vegetables stained the ground. Flies buzzed around his ankles. He was only 22. His father had died. His mother was sick. He worked 16 hours a day to buy her medicine. Each night he fell asleep on the floor, arms aching, but his eyes always burned with the same quiet fire. He never complained. He never cursed his life. He just pushed forward one step at a time. Back then he promised himself, "One day I will own a business. I will never let my family starve again." Now standing here as CEO in disguise, he felt the old ache in his bones. It reminded him who he truly was. Tom unlocked the front door. The hinges creaked into the quiet room. A single yellow bulb flickered above the small kitchen table. He placed a paper bag on the counter. Inside were 2 eggs and half a loaf of dry bread. He cracked the eggs into an old frying pan. The shells fell into the sink, landing with a hollow sound. Ethan sat at the table, homework spread before him. His hair was messy from school. His eyes looked tired, but he forced a smile when he saw his dad. Tom flipped the eggs with a plastic spatula. The smell filled the room, warm but thin. He sliced the bread and placed it on a chipped plate beside the eggs. "Dinner's ready, buddy," he whispered. Ethan nodded. His voice was small. "Thanks, Dad." Tom sat down across from him. He watched Ethan eat. In his chest, pride burned beside silent fear. Tomorrow would come fast. Tom watched Ethan finish his dinner. The boy licked crumbs from his fingers and pushed his plate away. He looked at his father with quiet gratitude. Tom forced a smile. He reached across the table and ruffled Ethan's hair. His hand felt rough against the boy's soft skin. In another part of town, David sat alone in his silent apartment. His dinner was untouched on the granite counter. The city lights glowed through tall glass windows. But inside it felt dark and empty. Narrator voice. 2 men, 2 worlds. Both had known the taste of hunger on sleepless nights. The only difference, one had forgotten what it felt like. The other was still living it every single day. David closed his eyes. Tom lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling above his bed. Tomorrow their worlds would collide, and neither of them would ever be the same again. Morning came heavy and gray. Tom climbed into his old truck. The seat springs squeaked under his weight. He shoved the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine coughed. A grinding noise rattled through the dashboard. Thick black smoke burst from the exhaust, curling into the cold air. Tom closed his eyes. He kept turning the key, praying under his breath. The truck jerked forward an inch, then stalled again. He opened the window. The smell of burning oil filled his lungs. People walking by covered their noses and stared. A woman shook her head in disgust. Tom avoided their eyes. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel. His knuckles turned white. His heart pounded against his ribs. Each beat screamed the same truth. If this truck died today, everything else would die with it. He drew a slow breath and tried again. The engine roared, weak but alive. Tom parked his truck behind the warehouse. He leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes for a moment. His breath felt heavy in his chest. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The edges were torn. Oil stains smeared the corners. It was an overdue bill. 3 red letters stamped across the top. Final notice. The numbers blurred as he stared at them. The total was more than he made in 2 weeks. He let out a long sigh. His shoulders slumped. He folded the paper again, careful not to rip it further. Slowly, he slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. The fabric was thin. A small hole near the seam caught his finger. He pressed the paper deeper until it rested against his chest. He sat there in silence. Outside, trucks rolled past and engines roared. Inside his cab, everything felt still and small. David stood near the loading dock, clipboard in hand. He pretended to check inventory sheets, his pen tapping quietly against the paper. Tom sat on the back bumper of his truck. His head was bent low, phone pressed to his ear. "Please," Tom whispered. His voice shook. "Can I get an extension just for this month? My son, he's 12. He's a good kid. I promise I'll pay by next week." He paused, listening. His shoulders tensed. He ran a hand over his tired eyes. "Yes, I understand. Thank you anyway." He ended the call and stared at the ground. His boots were coated in dust and oil. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and stood up slowly. David watched from a distance. The pen in his hand stopped tapping. He had come here to inspect operations. Instead, he was starting to see something he couldn't ignore. Tom pulled his truck up to the curb. The brakes squealed as he stopped. He grabbed the package from the passenger seat and stepped out. The customer stood waiting by the door. She crossed her arms tight across her chest. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the truck. "Seriously," she snapped. "You're delivering my order in that piece of junk." Tom kept his head down. "I'm sorry, Mom. Here's your package." She snatched it from his hands. Her nose wrinkled as she looked at the rust spreading across the truck's side panels. Black grease dripped near the back tire. "Disgusting," she muttered. Her voice rose. "Why don't you throw this trash away and get a real job? You're pathetic." Tom said nothing. He clenched his jaw. His fingers curled into his palms until they hurt. Behind him, the engine coughed again, belching thick smoke into the morning air. He felt every word burn into his skin. Tom stood still as the customer slammed her door. The echo rang in his ears. Slowly, he turned back towards his truck. His head hung low. The morning sun cast long shadows across the street. Dust swirled around his boots with each step. He reached for the truck's handle. His hand trembled. Oil stains darkened his fingertips. He clenched them into a fist to stop the shaking, but his knuckles only turned white. He climbed into the cab and shut the door. The thin metal rattled from the force. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel. His eyes burned. Tears welled up, blurring the cracked plastic dashboard. He sucked in a sharp breath and forced them back. Outside, traffic moved on. People rushed by, busy with their lives. Inside the truck, Tom sat alone. His chest ached with silent pain. Each breath felt heavier than the last. But he knew he couldn't stop. David stood behind a stack of pallets hidden from view. His clipboard felt heavy in his hand. The edge dug into his palm. He watched Tom sit in his truck, head pressed against the wheel. The man's shoulders shook with silent grief. David's jaw tightened. A dull ache formed behind his eyes. He forced himself to take a slow breath, but it didn't ease the heaviness in his chest. He looked down at the clipboard. Numbers, orders, delivery schedules filled the page in neat black ink. Profits and targets, strategy and growth. He gripped it tighter until his knuckles turned pale. The paper crumpled under his thumb. For years, these numbers were everything to him. They defined success. They proved his worth. but now staring at Tom's trembling hands through the windshield, those numbers felt empty. David lowered the clipboard to his side, his gaze darkened with a silent decision. This was not what he built his company for. David closed his eyes. The warehouse noises faded into silence. He remembered sitting at a long glass table. A contract lay open before him. The numbers on the last page glowed like gold. $1 million. His first major deal. He held a silver pen between his fingers. The room smelled of polished wood and fresh ink. Around him, men in suits smiled and nodded, waiting for his signature. David signed his name with careful strokes. Cameras flashed, hands clapped against his back. Champagne bottles popped open somewhere behind him. He lifted his eyes from the paper. Across the table, he saw his reflection in the dark window. His suit was perfect, his tie sharp, but his face looked empty. No pride, no joy. Just tired eyes staring back at him. In that moment, he felt nothing. His chest tightened as the memory faded. He opened his eyes to the present. Tom still sat alone in his broken truck. Tom sat in the driver's seat. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled. He reached into the paper bag on the passenger side and pulled out a piece of dry bread. He tore it in half and chewed slowly. Each bite scratched his throat. He didn't mind. Hunger was easier to ignore than fear. His eyes drifted to the dashboard. Taped above the cracked speedometer was a small photo. Ethan stood in front of his school backpack slung over one shoulder. His smile was wide and bright. Tom's gaze softened. He brushed his thumb across the photo's edge. The tape had curled at the corners from summer heat. "I'm sorry, buddy," he whispered. His voice broke. "Dad's trying, I promise." Outside, trucks rumbled past and men shouted orders. But inside his cab, there was only silence, broken by the sound of his shallow breathing. He folded the rest of the bread back into the bag and closed his eyes. Tom leaned back against the seat. The bread sat heavy in his stomach. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then rubbed his eyes. His gaze returned to Ethan's photo on the dashboard. The boy's smile seemed to glow against the cracked plastic. Tom let out a shaky breath. His voice came out low and rough. "Just a few more months," he whispered. "If this truck can keep running. Just a few more months." He rested his hand on the steering wheel. The leather was torn, exposing yellow foam beneath. His fingers traced the rough edges. Then maybe... He stopped himself. His chest tightened. Hope was dangerous. It always cost more than he could afford. Outside, the sun climbed higher. Engines roared to life around him. Drivers pulled out of the lot one by one. Tom stayed seated, staring at the photo, feeling his heart beat against his ribs. He didn't see David watching from a distance. David watched Tom from across the lot. The morning sun glared off the truck's rusted roof. His chest felt tight. His mind drifted back to a quiet cemetery. Gray stones stretched across a small hill. He knelt in front of a simple grave, fingers tracing his mother's name etched into cold granite. Wind rustled the dry grass around him. His suit jacket flapped lightly against his arms. Tears slipped down his face, dripping onto his polished shoes. He remembered whispering, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm trying. I promise I'll make you proud." But she never saw the man he became. She only knew the boy who sold fruit at the market to buy her medicine. The boy who came home each night with blistered hands and empty pockets. David clenched his jaw as the memory faded. His eyes burned with grief and anger. He turned back to Tom's truck. In that moment, he saw his own past sitting behind the wheel. Tom pulled out onto the main road. The morning traffic was heavy. He pressed the gas pedal gently. The truck shuddered beneath him, gears grinding. Halfway through the intersection, the engine let out a loud crack. Then silence. The steering wheel locked. The dashboard lights flickered off. Horns blared behind him. A car swerved around its driver, cursing through an open window. Tom turned the key again and again. Nothing. Just a weak click echoing inside the cab. In the rearview mirror, he saw his customer step onto the sidewalk. She stared at his stalled truck, then shook her head in disgust. Without a word, she turned and walked away, leaving her order behind on the curb. Tom slammed his hand against the wheel. His chest tightened as cars honked and swerved around him. Sweat dripped down his neck into his collar. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the heat of shame burn through his skin. Tom pressed his forehead against the steering wheel. The smell of burnt oil and metal filled the cab. Horns continued to blare behind him, but he didn't move. His chest heaved with each ragged breath. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the cracked dashboard in front of him. He clenched his fists so tight his nails dug into his palms. "Come on," he whispered, voice shaking. "Please, not today." A tear slid down his cheek, landing on his wrist. Another fell onto his jeans, leaving a small dark circles on the faded denim. He raised his head and slammed his hand against the wheel. The horn let out a short, broken beep. He hit it again and again until his knuckles ached with each strike. His shoulders shook as silent sobs escaped his chest. Outside traffic kept moving. People kept living. Inside the cab, Tom sat alone with a taste of salt on his lips and hopelessness burning in his throat. Tom wiped his face with the back of his hand. His shoulders trembled with each breath. The cab felt small and suffocating. A soft knock tapped against his window. He turned his head slowly. David stood outside wearing his faded work jacket and yellow hard hat. His eyes were calm, lined with quiet concern. Tom rolled down the window halfway. The smell of exhaust and dust drifted between them. "Hey," David said gently. "You okay?" Tom swallowed hard. His voice felt stuck in his throat. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just nodded a small, weak movement. David looked at the dead engine, then back at Tom's red, tired eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them moved fast, but here time felt still. "Need anything?" David asked. Tom shook his head. He forced a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "All right," David said softly, stepping back, but inside his mind was already turning. David lingered by the truck, hands resting on his tool belt. Tom kept his eyes on the steering wheel, fingers tracing the cracks in the worn leather. "My son," Tom's voice came out rough and low. He cleared his throat, but it didn't help. "Ethan, he's 12. Good kid, smart too, likes science." He paused his thumb, picking at a tear in the seat fabric. "He told me last week he wants to stop coming to work with me. Says he's embarrassed." Tom's lips trembled. He blinked hard, trying to clear the tears gathering in his eyes. I want to buy a better truck. Nothing fancy, just something clean, something he wouldn't be ashamed to sit in." His breath hitched. "I promised him one day he'd be proud of me." He glanced at David, eyes shining with silent desperation. "That's all I want. Just a truck. For him." David didn't say a word, but his heart felt heavier with every syllable. David turned away from the truck. He couldn't let Tom see his face. He walked a few steps toward the loading bay, staring at the cracked pavement beneath his boots. A single tear slipped down his cheek, leaving a thin, shining line across his skin. His chest felt heavy. Each breath burned as it left his lungs. He clenched his jaw, trying to steady himself, but the ache only grew deeper. Narrator voice. For years, David chased numbers. He measured success in contracts signed and zeros on a check. But listening to Tom's quiet dream, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He remembered the boy who once pushed a rusty wheelbarrow through crowded markets, praying for enough to feed his sick mother. He realized he had forgotten why he started this journey. And for the first time in years, David Miller felt ashamed of the man he had become. He wiped his cheek and turned back towards Tom's truck. Something inside him was changing. Tom sat for a long moment in the silent truck. The engine was dead. Traffic flowed around him like a river ignoring a broken branch. Finally, he opened the door with a slow push. The hinges squeaked. He stepped down onto the cracked asphalt, his boots scraping against tiny stones. He walked around to the back, his shoulders slumped forward as if gravity itself had grown stronger overnight. He opened the rusted side panel and began gathering his tools. Wrenches, old gloves, a roll of duct tape worn thin at the edges. Each piece clinked dully as he placed them in a faded plastic box. He paused and looked up at the sky. Gray clouds moved slowly above the lot. A faint breeze brushed his sweat-streaked face. For a moment, he closed his eyes. His chest tightened with a pain he couldn't swallow. Hope felt too far away to reach. The truck was silent behind him like a friend who had given up. David stood by the loading dock, watching Tom pack his tools into the plastic box. His chest felt heavy with a feeling he couldn't name. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up with smudged fingerprints. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. He pressed call and held the phone to his ear. The ringing felt endless. Finally, a voice answered. "This is Mike." David kept his eyes on Tom as he spoke. His voice was calm but firm. "Mike, I need you to prep a new truck. Full inspection, full fuel. Today." There was silence on the line. "Then today, sir, right now," David said. His grip on the phone tightened. "Get it done." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. His fingers trembled slightly. He took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. Tomorrow, nothing would be the same for Tom Harris. Tom placed the last wrench into his box and closed the lid with a quiet snap. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw Ethan's name glowing on the screen. He answered quickly, forcing his voice to sound strong. "Hey buddy, what's up?" Ethan's voice came through small and broken. "Dad." Tom's chest tightened. "What is it, son?" There was a pause, then a quiet sob. "Today at school, kids were laughing at me." Tom swallowed hard. "Why were they laughing?" Ethan sniffed. They said you drive a garbage truck. They called me trash boy." Tom closed his eyes. A sharp pain cut through his chest. His hand tightened around the phone. "I'm sorry, Dad," Ethan cried. "I didn't know what to say." Tom's lips trembled. "Don't be sorry, Ethan. Never be sorry." His eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. He whispered, "I promise. One day you'll be proud." David walked across the lot with steady steps. The morning sun glinted off the new truck parked behind him. In his right hand, he held a set of keys. The metal clicked softly against his palm. He stopped a few feet away from Tom, who stood wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Tom didn't notice him at first. His shoulders were slumped, his gaze fixed on the ground. David took a deep breath. Slowly, he reached up and removed his yellow hard hat. He pulled it off, revealing short gray hair, damp with sweat. He tucked the hat under his arm. Tom looked up. His eyes widened with confusion. For a moment he said nothing, just stared at David's face. Without the hard hat and dirt-streaked jacket, David no longer looked like a worker. The quiet power in his eyes, the calm confidence in the way he stood. It was unmistakable. Recognition flickered across Tom's face. Tom blinked hard. His mind struggled to match what his eyes saw. The man standing before him wasn't just a worker in a faded jacket. It was his boss, the owner, the fee. The name printed on every invoice, every payslip. His voice came out as a whisper, rough and trembling. "Wait, you're David Miller." David didn't answer right away. He watched Tom's eyes fill with confusion, fear, and something close to shame. He nodded once, slow and quiet. "Yeah," he said softly. "I am." Tom's mouth opened, but no words came out. His chest rose and fell with each shaky breath. For a moment he just stood there, gripping the plastic toolbox so hard, his knuckles turned white. Silence stretched between them. Around them, forklifts beeped and engines rumbled, but neither man heard a sound. Tom swallowed hard. Why are you here?" David took a slow breath, feeling the keys in his hand. He was about to change everything. David held out his hand. The keys dangled from his fingers, catching the morning light. Tom looked at them, then back at David, his brow furrowed in confusion. David's voice was calm, low and steady. "Take them," he said. Tom shook his head slightly. I don't understand." David's eyes softened. A small, sad smile touched his lips. 30 years ago, he began, "I was just like you, broke, tired, scared. I worked 16 hours a day, pushing a cart through the market. My mom was sick. I couldn't afford her medicine." His fingers tightened around the keys for a moment before he continued. "One day a stranger gave me a chance. He gave me a small loan to buy my first delivery truck. It saved my life." He looked directly into Tom's eyes. "I've never forgotten what that felt like. And I promised myself, If I ever could, I'd do the same for someone else." He pressed the keys into Tom's trembling hand. Tom stared at the keys in his palm. His fingers curled around them, gripping them so tight his knuckles turned white. His knees gave out. He sank onto the cracked asphalt, the toolbox tipping over beside him. A wrench rolled out and clinked against the ground. Tears poured down his face. They dripped onto his work pants, darkening the worn fabric. His shoulders shook with each sob that escaped his chest. David stood above him, silent. His own eyes glistened as he watched Tom break. Slowly, a single tear slid down his cheek, cutting through the dust on his skin. Footsteps pounded across the lot. Ethan ran toward them, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. He dropped it on the ground and wrapped his small arms around his father's shaking body. "Dad?" Ethan whispered, his voice cracking with relief. "It's okay. We're okay now." Tom held his son tight, pressing his wet face into Ethan's hair. For the first time in years, he felt hope. Ethan clung to his father, his small hands gripping Tom's back. Tom buried his face into Ethan's hair, breathing in the faint scent of soap and school hallways. David stood quietly beside them, his eyes fixed on the ground. The keys still dangled from Tom's trembling fingers, catching small flashes of morning sun. Forklifts moved in the distance. Workers shouted orders. Life continued around them. But in that moment, everything felt still. Narrator voice. Business is not just about numbers. It's not only about contracts signed or products sold. It's about people. It's about moments like this, when one small act of kindness becomes a lifeline, when hope is handed from one heart to another. David looked at Tom and Ethan. His chest felt lighter than it had in years. Because true business is not just about selling, it's about giving. It's about creating something that can never be measured on a balance sheet. It's about giving hope. David sat behind the wheel of his black pickup truck. The engine hummed softly as he pulled out of the warehouse lot. He turned onto the highway. The city skyline stretched before him, its glass towers glowing orange under the falling sun. Shadows grew long across the roads. The sky burned with streaks of gold and deep purple. He drove with one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel. The other tapped the truck's console in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. As the sun dipped lower, its last light caught in his eyes, turning them warm and bright. For the first time in years, his chest felt open. His breath felt easy. He remembered Tom's tears, Ethan's small arms hugging his father, the keys glinting between trembling fingers. A quiet smile touched his lips. Tomorrow there would be meetings and deals again. But today reminded him of something far greater, and deep inside hope flickered like the sunset ready to rise again. Today you watched a man remember why he started. You saw another man receive hope when he had nothing left. Two lives crossed in one quiet morning. One gave, one received. But both walked away, changed. Business is not just about money or deals closed. It's about people. It's about what you choose to do when no one is watching. So now, it's your turn. What will you do today? Will you walk past someone's pain, or will you stop and give them a chance to breathe again? Maybe it's a smile. Maybe it's forgiveness. Maybe it's giving someone the opportunity they've been praying for. Because in the end, what we give is what truly defines us. Comment below with a story of kindness you've witnessed. Share this video to remind someone that hope still exists. Let's fill this world with stories worth remembering.